Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be talking about marketing tall buildings, but primarily from an office point of view. My name's Nigel Smith, and as Max said, I'm the Executive Director for Landlord Project Services in Asia, which is really looking at large mixed-use projects. I've been working and living in Hong Kong and mainly working in China for the last 23 years. I've had the pleasure of working on a lot of the tallest buildings in Asia from a design, marketing, and leasing perspective. So really to understand how to maximize the investment value for your tall structure, you really need to start to understand about the occupiers, as we were just saying on the last presentation. And I think the important point to note here is that there has been a fundamental shift, I believe, in the way that developers, occupiers, and investors are really looking at how they approach office buildings. And this is quite a controversial slide, but I think the old adage of location, 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 or should I say city, district, street, has really changed into something that's far more complicated from an occupier's point of view. Yes, location is still very much in the frame, but it may not just be at a city or a district level. And when you start to consider that you've got the same product potentially on two different sides of the street, you start to have to understand how they think about differentiating their buildings, how the developer starts to present the building, and that the occupier starts to understand effectively the benefits. And from my personal experience from Hong Kong, China, I've seen a shift, really, a fundamental change from the 1990s, when I started marketing tall buildings, all the way through to present day. And whilst this is a relatively subjective slide, we've seen that location has lowered itself in terms of what I call my top 10, in terms of the way a tenant will consider a building. Design, specifications, facilities management, environment, location accessibility, number 6 and 7, through to ownership, tenant mix, and then finally the quality of the materials that they use. And we've seen a shift from that location being number 1 through to the management, and then now ultimately environmental and sustainable issues becoming more into the frame in terms of their decision-making process. And the reason for this is quite simply the employee. As we've heard several times in the previous presentation and earlier today, even by Adrian Smith, that really it's about what does the employee think of your building? Does the iconic status mean something for the employee? And yes, it can do. And businesses now realize that their focus should be on the employee, business partners, and then their customers. Because if you can't operate a business without the right skill set, you're never going to be able to grow. And we've done research over many years now. This actually comes from London. Nick Axford, our head of research, who's now moved to Asia. He was looking at the effect or the impact of the features and benefits of buildings in terms of the design stage, the use and operation, and then the ultimate disposal. And I found it very interesting that key words started to pop up that relate to the employee, what they want, what they're passionate about: staff comfort, community, image, efficiency, monitoring, and recycling. These are all key words that are starting to come up more and more in terms of the way that we market buildings. And one of the reasons for this is quite simply, there's been a shift in the number of types of occupiers within one office building. Now you have up to 4 generations working in the same office. There's the older generation looking for that corner office with a door that gets closed, only open for a cup of coffee or at lunchtime, all the way through to the younger generations who don't want to even be in an office. They want to sit in the coffee shop or the pantry downstairs or whatever. So they're looking for far more flexible options, and interior designers, architects, they're all looking at buildings that can help them in terms of the way that they operate as a business within the bounds of the number of generations. And of course, yes, always the environmental and sustainability issues are coming up, particularly from the younger generation. And the way I liken this is really, there's also been a change in the traditional triple bottom line. We started to talk a lot about the triple bottom line in the 97 economic crisis, and then again in the global financial crisis, and we're still talking about the triple bottom line. But I'd like to encourage you today to think about the new triple bottom line, which is really more towards the balance and the space and the creativity that an office tower or a tall building or a particular mixed-use tower can offer a company, a business, to operate more effectively and more productively. And without getting too subjective again, it really is coming down to inspiration. If an employee is inspired, he's therefore, in theory, more creative. And that could, in theory, lead to greater productivity. And if you've got greater productivity, then suddenly you're attracting a better talent pool. Because we now realize that, your business is based upon your workforce. From a business point of view, that's slightly different. They start to look at image. They start to look at competitive advantage and how they can grow faster. And if one building is perceived to have a better image or better reputation, then that's going to change their outlook within a business community or even globally. For a developer, of course, this is going to translate into higher rents, faster commitment, marketing and leasing. Leasing is the rental side, the marketing is the commitment side. It also means a different type of tenant, not just in terms of the industry, but also the level of covenants that a quality tenant can bring to the building, the image itself. And I think there's a lot of potential in terms of that partnership going forward between developers and also their occupiers. So if we see what the occupiers are wanting, let's have a quick look at what are the developers or what have been the trends in the development world in terms of trying to meet some of these criteria and these key decision-making requirements. Well, to start with, there's generally some common characteristics. For tall buildings particularly, there's often a central location issue. There needs to be public transportation. The iconic image, this is something that we've been talking about more and more, and whether there's a real value in an iconic image. Notice that I said earlier in my top 10, iconic status didn't come into it, but it is in there somewhere in terms of the design and perhaps even in the environment, which includes views. Obviously, high-value locations like Luzhou Shui here are driving the height of the buildings, although cost is an issue. And tall buildings are far more expensive, and they don't always net the equivalent rental that you would expect. It really depends on the location itself. But let's look at how they're driving rents and how they're driving the marketability. Well, I see it as twofold, really. I think what we've been doing to date is really driving and building for the wow factor. We've seen the picture on the left many times today, almost in every single presentation I've been in has had it. The one on the right is slightly different. It's Guomao, China World in Beijing, and we saw that today. Incredible structures that are icons of themselves and are destination points within the city itself. But it's not just from the outside point of view, it can also be the wow factor inside. And from a relatively simplistic point of view, when we were marketing to IFC, we had to differentiate the central piece of the tower from the rest of the tower. There were basically 3 different owners in the tower. And we worked out very simply that a 3-way configuration on the core was far more effective, had a higher efficiency rate. The bay depths were greater. So we can see the wow factor not just on the outside, but also on the inside. But I think there's been a shift, again, to what I like to call the now factor. And this is more related to the 4th generation, the youngest generation. But not just in terms of the speed of the internet connection or the wireless connectivity. We used to talk about that this building, you can speak on your mobile phone from the car through to the lift up into your office. That's old. What we're really talking about is the space, the creative space that they're working in. Because, as I said earlier, the younger generations don't want to work just in a box. They want to go downstairs for a cup of coffee. And a few years ago, we used to say having a coffee shop downstairs was like having an extra meeting room. And it is true, but we're going to the next level again. Now we don't want to be in a coffee shop. We want to be in small niches, little places. So really, the vertical city has come about as a way of living, of the younger generations and ultimately some of the older generations realizing how you can move around and become more creative. And that's where we get into the realms of social networking. And social networking is an extremely powerful marketing tool. Perhaps one of the best examples that I've known of is Canary Wharf in London. And for me, the definition of success for Canary Wharf was really the article on the left-hand side, which I actually got through an app on my mobile phone, that Canary Wharf, I just read this, Canary Wharf will finally come of age over the next 2 months. This is 20 years after it first started, by the way. Will come of age over the next 2 months when the UK's new financial centre overtakes the traditional City of London as the biggest employer of bankers in Europe. That was last year. It may have changed this year, who knows. But the way that they've embraced the internet, the way that they've embraced applications, the way they've embraced the water. And water is a very powerful decision maker when an occupier looks around. But also the plug-and-play buildings that they use down there, effectively selling off the plots of land with all the infrastructure underneath. It all starts to come together. In other words, where lifestyle meets the business. Yes, green factors are important. I was asked about that earlier today. Are green features paying the bills from a developer's point of view? Not necessarily, but what they are doing is increasing your marketability, your commitment rate, the type of tenant, the quality of the tenant. Perhaps I could just quickly look at some research that CBRE have done over the last couple of years. This goes back to 2009, 2010. But basically, we looked at our portfolio of buildings in the States, and we separated them between green and non-green. And we started to ask questions of some of the occupiers and also the developers themselves, and we found out that occupiers are happier. They want more daylight. They want more access to public transportation, healthier indoor quality. Some of the basically benefits of the features that we've been talking about. That's the VAV air conditioning systems or the ceiling heights and so on and so forth. Developers are finding their buildings now to be more efficient. And they understand that this can have a powerful effect on the maintenance of the building and the overall operation costs, and that it does help to attract new tenants, and there's ultimately an increase in your investment value. But this is the most important slide for me, which starts to prove that the employee being more important and the productivity and the inspiration and creativity and the balance issues in terms of what a building offers are important. Because what the research showed is that, the businesses in greener buildings are more efficient. And believe it or not, but there was research out of Australia a few years ago now where they showed that a greener building, which was compared to a non-green building, had fewer sick days in the office. So ultimately what you can say is that if your building has fewer sick days, your staff are in the office more often, in theory you're more productive. I know it sounds all a little convoluted, but there is some method in that madness. Of course, rents are rising, and we've seen that happening. And when we did a survey over just the last couple of weeks of office tenants for tall buildings, again, there was a commitment to certification, and it is becoming a minimum standard for a lot of the occupiers. So let's get on to the two main areas of this talk, which is marketing and leasing. Well, marketing, in terms of marketing, it's always essential to research your audience. I talked about my top 10, the design, the specifications, working out what you can do with your location. If you have a prime location, then you can sell that. But if you're in a new CBD, there's plenty of other things that you can talk about within your marketing. I talked about the partnering. Heron Tower is an excellent example where, if you can just read it, it says, our goal is to foster relationships between the tenant and the landlord based on trust. At the very least, it's about giving the tenant peace of mind. But more than that, we want tenants to feel valued and have a genuine sense of belonging. I've never seen that before, and I've been marketing buildings for 25 years. That real genuine partnership. And again, as I said earlier, I think there's a lot more that can be done and seeing your occupiers as strategic partners rather than just somebody who pays the rent. Differentiate yourself. I've already used this one as an example, but here we were marketing against two other landlords in the same building at a time which was 2003, that the Hong Kong office market was on its knees. What's interesting, if you look at the rental increase from 2003 through to 2010, it jumped from approximately $10 Hong Kong per square foot to nearly 200 Hong Kong dollars per square foot. Yes, location played a part of that, but so did the design, the specifications. There was a genuine flight to quality, which is so important as we find in marketing buildings. Consider the local market. This is a favorite one of mine, really going in and understanding how the market considers your building. Understanding whether just selling the tall feature of your building is important. Where is the benefit of just being tall? And this is an example whereby I looked at the lifestyle concept back in 2005 and started to connect the very successful shopping center with the office tower that had just been completed. And we increased the commitment from 26 to 63% within 12 months. Make a connection, Seoul IFC. You can just see on the right-hand side in the banknotes coming through in terms of the brochure, but really quality of materials. And I know the next speaker will be talking more about that. We're trying to make a connection, and we've got a lot of IFCs out there, and now ICCs, and it used to be WTCs. We've got to start thinking of different names, different acronyms, but still creating that connectivity. Being more visible, global destination inspiring business. The client came to us wanting to get onto the global stage. How can we do that? Well, visibility, really. We know that very few developers spend the full amount on marketing, and even then, it's only about 8% of the average annual rental. But it is such a powerful tool in terms of building a brand and building a reputation. But if you are going to start sending out information, control is the key to marketing. The control of the flow, because people hear different things. Somebody says 74%, another guy hears 72%. Before you know it, it's gone down to 69 and then 60% efficiency. You must be very careful the way that you send out the information, how it is given, who gives it, more importantly. And ultimately, it must be consistent the whole time. No changes. So work out in the beginning exactly what you're going to say, how much information do you reveal, and where do you build it from and go to. The results speak for themselves. In terms of ICC, they got 3 of the greatest banks. They filled up their building at record speed, and rents in this tower went from 18 Hong Kong dollars per square foot up to today about 70 or 80 over a 5-year period, which is very impressive considering it was on a reclaimed piece of land on the wrong side of the harbour and in a new location with no other facilities around it. It's done extremely well, and branding and marketing certainly helped with pushing that through. From a leasing perspective, the process, the phases are very important to understand. I believe that it takes up to 5 years to market a building to get it through to the leasing stage. That process of branding is very important. And it all starts with the research, understanding your project, going through the marketing strategy and plan, and then ultimately the implementation of the leasing and marketing strategy. Build awareness early, site hoarding, brochures, call to action, posters, PR, all absolutely essential tools. But so is a leasing strategy, and this is an example that I still use in terms of the way that you can rack up the rents as you start to achieve critical milestones in terms of the commitment rates. Very few developers that I come across actually strategically consider the rental rates. They very rarely consider the current market rentals, and they're always overpricing themselves, and they wonder why that they can't lease up their building. And ultimately, there's a sudden drop, which is always a shame. If you pitch it at the right level, if you strategically look at how you can increase that, then you will be a lot more effective. Of course, balancing where the anchor tenants go, balancing when to increase the rents, bearing in mind that your market can shift up or down as the market cycles flow through. But the last bullet point there, holding the course, was told to me by Chris Tollast, our director, who's basically been on Canary Wharf for the last 20 years and through the ups and downs and 2 bankruptcies and whatever it is. But he said at the end of the day, what made it a success was holding the course. And when the government jumped in, they held the course in terms of the strategy, the rents, the marketing. Because you never know when you're going to hit a volatile point. You never know when it's going to turn. In Hong Kong, we spend 75% of our time outside of the normal band of 10% up or down. So in terms of the long-term average, we're 75% of the time outside of that. So you can imagine in Hong Kong, we're constantly shifting our rents up and down, and you need to be on top of that. So adjusting, reviewing quarterly, market intelligence, being realistic when asking for a premium. So as a summary slide, just in terms of how to maximize the investment values for tall buildings, first of all, align yourself to the target audience. What do the occupiers want in terms of the features, but also the benefits, because it's the benefits that ultimately sell. Leverage your reputation. Not enough developers do this, even when they're new at developing real estate. Reputations are deep, and corporate social responsibility is even deeper and becoming more and more important. And understanding how the background of your owner as an occupier is very, very important in today's market. Build for the wow, but deliver the now. Make sure you've got all those nooks and crannies and niches around the place. Not just the coffee shop downstairs, which seems to be part of every single building. There's so much else you can do. Artwork, obviously, over the last few years has started to come in. There's many other themes and specialty retails that you can throw into the mix just to make a building interesting. And if it's not just interesting, bear in mind you're trying to differentiate yourself from your competitor who's probably right next door to you on the other side of the street. Features and benefits I've mentioned earlier. Commitment, build for the future. We've heard that in the previous presentation, which is so true. Trying to estimate what will be the requirements of the next generation. And then finally, balance. Balance not just within the space and the employee arenas, as I mentioned right at the beginning, but in terms of the rental and the commitment levels that you expect. Be realistic in terms of the take-up rates, where your demand is going to come from. And again, coming back to point one, if you're aligned to your demand, then you will be able to increase your rents and your commitment rates. Thank you.